You're very welcome to today's seminar with Hanna Kickham of O'Connell Mahon Architects. My name is Ruth O'Reilly and I'm an architect working at the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design, which is part of the National Disability Authority. We're absolutely delighted to be hosting today's webinar with the RIAI, and shortly I'll be handing over to Ginlong Wang, who's going to introduce Hanna to you. Ginlong is the Assistant Education Director at the RIAI. So Hanna is going to present on her work today for about 40 minutes, and then we should have 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to send those to us, and we'll be looking at those at the end of our presentation. So I hope that you all enjoy Hanna's presentation. I must say I'm really looking forward to myself, and I'm going to hand over now to Ginlong Wang from the RIAI to introduce Hanna to you.
Thank you, Ruth. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce Hanna as our speaker today. Hanna graduated from UCD in 2000 and joined O'Connell Mahon Architects in March 2010. She brought with her extensive experiences in various building types, including educational institutions, commercial retail centres, residential buildings, and public infrastructure projects. Since joining O'Connell Mahon, Hanna has made significant contributions to major healthcare projects, such as the National Children's Hospital and the Radiotherapy Treatment Unit at Alt na Gelvin Hospital. She was responsible for the delivery of the Merrifield Nursing Home in Chapel Nizzard and has worked on several mental health units nationwide. Hanna's played a pivotal role in the development of the National Rehabilitation Hospital in Dunleary in 2021. This project earned the RIAI Universal Design Award in 2021 and received an honorable mention in the UIA 2023 Friendly and Inclusive Spaces Awards. Currently, Hanna is working on the delivery of a new outpatient project and critical care wing for the Rotunda Maternity Hospital. Her work on these projects has deepened her expertise and in designing healthcare facilities and fostered her keen interest in creating buildings that are adaptable to various needs and inclusive for all users, emphasizing universal design principles. Welcome, Hanna. Over to you.
Oh. In sickness and in health, lessons from universal design in healthcare. So thank you very much, Gillian, and thank you to the RIAI Universal Design Task Force for inviting me to be here today, and to the Centre of Excellence in Universal Design with the NDA. I'm delighted to be giving this talk. So just a quick introduction. I know Gillian has actually said a lot of what I was going to say. I think joining OSMA in 2010, I've worked on, as you said, a lot of mental health care units, nursing homes, the Children's Hospital on the Mater site, and now working on the maternity hospitals with the Rotunda Hospital. I suppose in our office, our goal is to create sustainable buildings, resilient buildings, beautiful buildings, but they must be inclusive. I think working on such a broad range of healthcare projects has really exposed me to some of the challenges that people face in their daily lives, and it's really fostered my interest in universal design. I definitely don't feel like an expert. I think a lot of what I've learned has really been the design process, working with the staff and patients in the buildings that we've designed. Even though our focus is predominantly on healthcare, I think the main thing to point out here is that a lot of the people using our buildings aren't actually sick. They can be older people or children or pregnant people who are meeting some challenges in their daily lives. So what is universal design? It's designing so that a building or system can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, their size, their ability or disability. And I've highlighted that to the greatest extent possible, and I'll touch on why later. So the 7 principles of universal design were developed in 1997 in the North Carolina State University. And the purpose of these was to act as a guide in designing, in this instance, buildings. The first principle is about equitable use. And really what that means is that it should be designed and constructed to be accessible and usable regardless of your ability or your disability. The building should be flexible in use. It should be simple, intuitive, perceptible. There should be a tolerance for error. If you get lost, for example, as you're going about your way, looking at signage, there should be that tolerance for error. There should be low physical effort, and there should be size and space for approach. But why is it so important? When something doesn't work for me, I can get frustrated. Those who work with me know that I can have a tumultuous relationship with technology. And I'm also finding that tech seems to be getting smaller and smaller every day. But these are small challenges that I can overcome. I can simply wear my glasses, or I can call poor Andre in our technology department, and he can help me address that challenge. However, the challenges that some people face daily are not always so straightforward to resolve. People spend their lives in buildings, and it is in buildings that obstacles can often emerge. If our buildings are not designed to enable people to navigate them and enjoy them, then we as architects have added unnecessary frustration to somebody's day. Small changes can really make our buildings better. So again, why is universal design important? Ultimately, it comes down to human diversity. We're all familiar with physical disability, but most disabled people have more than one disability. Dementia is a really good example of this. There can be physical, sensory, and cognitive decline. It affects memory, thinking, orientation, comprehension, and language. It is estimated that 150,000 people in Ireland will have dementia by 2045. That's 11,000 new cases a year. And 2/3 of these will live in the community, in the buildings that we design. Again, neurodiversity is a really important consideration. So 15% of the population in the UK are neurodiverse, and it was probably a similar ratio as expected in Ireland. This is a term that encompasses a range of conditions like autism, dyslexia, and ADHD. This emphasizes the natural diversity of human minds, and the associated learning differences can impact how a person experiences a building. By applying principles of universal design, we are, of course, designing for our children. They experience buildings in a different way in terms of scale and their strength. And finally, we are designing for our future selves. Disability and aging are just part of being human. Right, let's jump there. Apologies, there's a delay in my screen. So today I'm going to talk to you about the National Rehabilitation Hospital, the NRH, which is a project that's really dear to my heart. The NRH can trace its history back to 1916. It was initially a hospital for the treatment of tuberculosis, but today the hospital provides complex rehabilitation services for patients who have acquired a physical or a cognitive disability, either due to an accident, an illness, or an injury. So the campus sits on a busy area in Dún Laoghaire between Rochestown Avenue and Pottery Road. It was really important that the new design would fit seamlessly within the existing campus and connect directly to it, because there are some services that were remaining live. It was a steeply sloping site, over 6 meters in difference between the north and the south, which posed challenges in terms of accessibility, which I'll touch on later. What we really wanted to capitalise on was amazing views of the Dublin Mountains and the Dublin Bay, which we'll show you later on in the design. So a little bit about the staff and the patients out in the NRH. Patients can have spinal injury, limb absence, there's paediatric rehabilitation. 80% of the patients are wheelchair users. There's bariatric patients, 25% of acquired brain injury and stroke. And the patient stay is long-term. And the average stay was about 60 days, and I think in a standard hospital it's about 3 days. So this idea of the patient actually living on campus was really important consideration in our design. When we started the project, the staff and patients were working and living in a building that was no longer suitable for its purpose. It comprised of 120 bed spaces, but they're actually in kind of Nightingale ward accommodation style spaces. This meant that people with different genders, race, religion, or age were actually sharing the same room. This was quite difficult when they were going through some really life-changing experiences. What we in OCMA were the most taken aback by was the staff, how they could empower, encourage, and enable the patients there. And it was really obvious to us that the building that we designed would have to do the same. So the brief for the NRH was 120 single bedrooms with en-suites, and this changed from the Nightingale ward, which could provide peer support, to single bedrooms, which could be isolating, was also a really important factor in the design. There's integrated therapy spaces on each ward, which is unusual in a hospital where you would have therapy spaces within the ward itself. There's an independent living training apartment, and this was to help people learn to go back into the built environment following their rehabilitation. Connections to the existing hospital were also required, as I mentioned earlier. There's a hydrotherapy suite, a sports hall, a gym, and a fitness centre. The coffee shop was incorporated, and that was to try and make the community accessible to the building. Unfortunately, because of COVID, that didn't happen. They did have to shut it down from having the community come in, but that accessibility to the community had been in the brief from the outset. And there's accessible playground as well. Ultimately, the building had to empower the patients. So what was our approach to universal design? I think we had to acknowledge that as architects, we couldn't fully understand the requirements of the building users. Their needs were so complex and diverse. The available design literature just wasn't going to go far enough, so we had to engage with the experts. So we contacted Loughborough University, and we developed a NRH Universal Design Evaluation tool. What this did was look at all the patients within the hospital, and 6 patient personas were developed. These best represented the full cohort of patients within the hospital. When we were designing the building, we tracked how these 6 personas would move through the building. What obstacles would they meet from the built environment, and what assistive technologies did they rely on in their day-to-day environment? We considered many innovations, things like eye gaze control, sip and puff control for accessing lifts, etc. I think because of funding constraints, in a way, this is a government project, we couldn't put in all the automation that we identified as we worked through it. But the personas really helped us see that we didn't have to have everything automated. Part of rehabilitation, I suppose, is learning how to manually use things as well, and to improve and to progress and to push yourself. So by looking at the personas, we identified that 22 of the rooms of the 120 rooms should be fully automated, that the patient would be able to use, open and close the blinds, turn on the radio, close their doors, all from their bed. For example, a spinal patient who had no limb movement might rely on a sip and puff technology just to have this functionality and control. This is one of the personas, so it describes their physical or cognitive impairment. It will follow their patient pathway to discharge, because as they move through the hospital, sometimes it could be there for over a year, what their requirements were would change, and we had to understand that as we developed the design. What ability did they have to communicate, and how mobile were they? And as I touched on earlier, we would look at what the accessibility issues were within the existing hospital. On top of the 6 personas that we had identified, it was noted that all of these patients could have visual or hearing impairments in terms of applying it to the 6 personas. So again, what was our approach? We had to engage with the experts, and the experts, of course, were the staff, the patients, and the families. And we also engaged with a lot of external consultants. These really were the team. I mean, without that, it just didn't work. And they fed all the information back to us as the architect and the design team. It was really such a collaborative process, really enjoyable, really informative. And we engaged with the patients, and absolutely everything from the signage to colour to the weight of the door. I just want to touch on this, because in one of our signage meetings, a patient told us that as a result of brain damage, he could only see in black and white. So if you saw a field of daffodils in the distance in black and white, if he touched a daffodil in that field, it would turn to colour. He acknowledged in our signage meeting that was challenging, of course, for us, and he did not expect our designs to be able to help him in that way. But this is really important point to make about universal design. It's not a utopia we're trying to design. We're trying to design the best that we can for those people that are using our buildings. So the key design drivers in our project were about the integrated therapies that I mentioned, and how that changed the environment that a patient was living in. Effectively, it was work, rest, and play on a ward. Work being the therapy that they were doing, rest being sleeping in their bedrooms, and play being the social interaction in which they would give peer support. The ward layout had to be patient-driven. Orientation, wayfinding, and signage were extremely important. As I mentioned, the 25% acquired brain injury, they relied on this really good orientation, wayfinding, and signage on their day-to-day lives. Access to external spaces I'll touch on as well. The social inclusion and the single bedrooms, that balance being struck between the privacy that was now going to be in the hospital because of the single bedrooms, but the social exclusion that could have, and how could we encourage that support. The user experience from form, colour, light and pattern are also really important. And again, with acquired brain injury or dementia, patterns, gloss, glare, etc. Can get more challenging. So we had to look at that, and that's an important part in all buildings. So the ward plan concept for the hospital, the form and massing of the building are arranged around 2 larger and 2 smaller courtyards, which bring landscape and views, natural light and ventilation into all of the patient spaces. So we've got 2 wards per floor in a figure of 8 configuration. The avoidance of dead-end corridors, I suppose, encourages movement and aids rehabilitation and wayfinding. So for example, somebody who might lose their way, because they moved in a circle, they would always come back to the staff base. The bedrooms are arranged on the periphery, so they have those great views of the mountains, and the therapies, staff hubs and social spaces are centrally located. And each ward has access to numerous terraces. So the smaller and larger courtyards that I mentioned were all designed a little bit differently. Again, so that as you move through the building, it actually helps with wayfinding that these are slightly different. It also helps with social interaction, just seeing other people move through the building, but also helps staff with passive observation. It provides access to safe spaces. So the 2 larger courtyards at ground floor, one is a pediatric courtyard for children, and the other is for the acute acquired brain injury. So these are obviously the patients that require the most observation and safe spaces within the building. The dining and social spaces overlook those areas, again, to reduce a sense of isolation. And many of the terraces are designed either to be open, closed or half open, so that even in bad weather you can be outside. And there's spaces, quieter spaces and kind of larger spaces for group gatherings. So the intent for each of the ward floors was to ensure there was many of these terraces as possible, again, for that reason, that would be variation of spaces that you could go out to. So access to nature is integral to the design, as there's significant research-based evidence confirming that nature supports a healing environment. There's a lot of therapeutic gardens, there's mini golf, we have an accessible playground, and I think, again, all of this supports rehabilitation. There's a lot of gardening projects that go on, and actually mobility skills training as well, which is, again, another important part of rehabilitation, because ultimately this is what the building was about. So this is one of the views of one of the terraces, and you can see the mountains beyond, and I think you can see how uplifting that would be for a patient. The landscaping hasn't taken hold in this image yet, but we had to think about things like the guarding. So here it's glazed, it goes full height. It's a little bit higher than the normal 900, just to avoid barrier, I suppose, something in eye line on if you're in a wheelchair, or you can be wheeled out here in a bed as well. So this is the plan at the entrance level. All of the accessible parking is arranged directly outside the front door, and there's a covered entrance area and a waiting area immediately inside the main door. That kind of helps patients wait and to get picked up, that there is that visibility if they're able. The entrance foyer leads directly out onto the cafe courtyard, which overlooks the sports hall area below. And there's a spectator viewing area there just overlooking the sports hall as well as you come into the main entrance. We use that tool to try and make the space feel bigger. I think that was important. Again, it was a government project. It was a very small brief for the main entrance. It was 12 meters squared. So we had to use these tools to try and make the space feel more open, encourage that socialization, and just connect, I suppose, the patients as well. And there's a link there directly to the existing building too. So below there's the sports hall, which is centrally located between the existing building and the new building. There's the sports hall beside the gym, the therapy pool and the lap pool. And we've utilised sunken courtyards within these spaces, again, to bring light in, but to create a bit of a spa-like a feel in the pool as well. While it is for rehabilitation, we do want these spaces to feel, comforting, calming, relaxing as well. There's a lot, I suppose, out to the south for patients that then can go outside and don't aren't kept on the wards. There was south-facing putting green, gardens, meadows, an accessible playground, etc. So this is an extract from a long section of the building, and it shows the viewing area, a spectator viewing area there overlooking the sports hall. There's a climbing wall that's hooked up for training. There's the wheelchair transfer bay that has direct access to the aerobics studio, and there's a cafe with a safe courtyard as well. That safe courtyard gives direct access to the independent living unit that I was talking about. And really for patients, this was a goal to move to this apartment. It means you're just about to be discharged. And in this apartment, they would learn how to transition back into the built environment. So they wouldn't have, I suppose, the assistive technologies or all of the furniture and fitments that would have been within the existing building. So they're learning then to rehabilitate back home. And this is a short section extract through the building with the entrance and drop off just directly over the hydrotherapy suite and the sports hall, and then that spectator viewing area, which would look over the sports hall itself. So the approach to the building is direct. It incorporates tactile paving, seating with armrests and backrests, and a dog rest area. Actually, the dog rest area was really nice during COVID because one of the little boys who was in the hospital, he was allowed to have his dog come down, and that really provided, I suppose, comfort to him and was something he would look forward to on a daily basis. It's really actually an easy thing to add to a project. So a lot of these things that I'm talking about today, they're not difficult. They're small things that I've learned myself in the last, I suppose, 10 or 15 years, that all these really small changes make a big difference. A bench, for example, we wouldn't always have put armrests before. And then, it's an obvious thing, say, for a pregnant woman to be able to push themselves up, or as a person who's older to be able to push themselves up as well. It should be set off the main access route, and there should be space for a wheelchair. So I suppose don't forget that space for wheelchairs as well, just so that there can be socialization as a group. The drop-down area and pick-up area is clearly visible as well. So the entrance here, this is the entrance as you come in. On the left-hand side, you can just see the timber there, which is the sort of alcove area for the spectator viewing area. There's assistive technologies here as well, which were designed and developed by the client. And they are, so while I'm talking today about the built environment, talking with your client about assistive technologies and ways to help people who are using the buildings as well is very useful. Signage was a key consideration, but I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. So this is some of the images from the sports department. The sports suite comprised of therapy pools, the gym, and the sports hall. And I suppose the application of colour in the sports areas is bright and invigorating. It was important for us that would feel like very different from the living areas within the scheme. The sports hall incorporates facilities for wheelchair basketball. The hoops could be moved down during wheelchair basketball play, archery, and 17 other accessible sports. There is a wheelchair transfer bay that I mentioned before, and the viewing area that's above, we made sure that the glazing was low again so that people in wheelchair users would have uninterrupted views and there won't be anything at transom height. The signage is kept really simple. We did have a derogation here from the Irish due to the complex needs of our patients, but we still kept it very, very simple. Just on the left-hand side diagram there is a wheelchair weighing scales. And this just shows, I suppose we thought about it because of patient dignity. So just so the patient didn't have to go and ask the staff could they be weighed, and they would have some control of when they wanted to be weighed. And it's a small thing, but many people know that weight can be a little bit, people don't necessarily want to be asking people, can they be weighed? So just small little things like that, thinking about the person who's using the building. All of the toilet doors and public toilet doors in the scheme were yellow. Again, it was just a wayfinding tool so they could be easily identified. The fitness gym includes a shooting range, which was really interesting to design. And an aerobics studio, and then the gym equipment is all works on compressed air, so that assists with people who find it more challenging with certain weights. The changing rooms includes wheelchair accessible lockers and Actually, all of the changing rooms and the showers themselves were big enough to be able to have bed trolleys moved down, which meant that patients who had spinal injuries could actually shower, they could be changed, and they could use the pools, which is, you know, absolutely essential to full accessibility within the hospital. So this is the image of the therapy pool. The lap pool is just in the distance through the glazing, connecting both pools there, and the sunken garden there between the two pools, which kind of brings soft natural light into the space and a spa-like feel. There's a lot of different options on the lighting in this space. Part of this was for the sensory needs of some of the patients. And there's also additional sockets for sensory equipment that can be put in the pools. And there's hoist transfer as well within the scheme. We didn't put lights on the ceiling above the pool, so that patients who were training on their back wouldn't have that direct glare over their eyes as well. We did a lot of work on the tactile paving because some of the patients would be dragging their feet due to the injury that they might have. So it couldn't be too abrasive, couldn't be too slippy, obviously. And we also put that on the walls of the pool, just again to assist with that little bit of extra catch when they were working in the pool. So a clear wayfinding and signage strategy was really essential, as you can see. So we did think at the outset, there's 8 wards here. Should we have these color coded as 8 separate colors? But we thought there wouldn't be enough variation in 8 colors for certain cognitive ability. So it was agreed with the users and in all our stakeholder meetings that there would be 1 color per floor, and that the 2 wards on each floor would either be identified by a flower or a tree. What that meant was that somebody who couldn't read would have a bracelet on it, and they'd have the color of the floor that they were going to, and either the logo of the flower or the tree. We did a lot of work with the signage consultant on the length and the heights and height of text, the font of text. So you can see here, it doesn't say Lily Department or Lily Unit. We kept it short. Again, this was for cognitive reasons, that certain patients found it easier to take in shorter pieces of text. And you can see here again how the signage is simple as well. Braille is, again, it's important to think of Braille. Sometimes they can go into a building and see Braille that's actually up high, where patients in wheelchairs actually can't reach it. Or people, I didn't always say patients, people, or patients can't actually use it. So for us, having met all of these patients and working with them over such a long period of time, we all, of course, wanted them to feel included in their buildings. So signage and illustrations had to be inclusive. So we did a lot of work on that, and we feel it represents all of the patients within the building. So careful consideration was given to the colour scheme and the finishes to ensure that they reflected the activity levels that I mentioned before, like that. And I think part of this is about the therapeutic benefits of it. So in the sports hall, it was vibrant, as I was saying, but it would be much more calming as you move into the bedroom areas. So while we were trying to adopt all of these different colour schemes within the project, we had to be really conscious of light reflectance values. I know as architects, or maybe before I really worked on a lot of healthcare projects, I found them maybe a little bit of a hindrance, to be honest. You know, you wanted these schemes that you thought were potentially worked slightly better, but actually it makes such a difference for the people using the buildings. You know, those with visual impairments, the contrasting surfaces play a really vital part in accessibility, wayfinding, and just their overall experience of a building. These are really, I suppose, considerations that are relevant to all buildings. I think my own mother fell there recently, and I know just some of these simple tools could have helped in that instance. So again, the circulation and wayfinding. In this image, we've kept the lighting off-center within the corridor. So patients are sometimes moved on beds in the corridor, and we didn't want that direct glare over their eyes. We identify places of rest with flooring. There's different heights of seating in those resting points, and there's space for wheelchairs in those resting points as well. In the NRH, the back rests are high and they're very straight because of to avoid slouching within those chairs. So again, you might do that differently in a different building in terms, depending on on the main users and having a variation as well within the space. We've provided handrails throughout, I suppose just making sure you have enough of those resting spaces. That really encouraged, I think, patients to make it to the next, 15 meters down, and just to keep moving and moving and moving and rehabilitating and progressing. So this is one of the patient bedrooms. We did have high dependency bedrooms within the scheme as well. But this is an example of one of the standard bedrooms, and we had many meetings again on these. So the first thing we wanted to do was engage with the mountains beyond. We were conscious that many of the patients were wheelchair users or in bed. So it was important that at least one of the windows in the room would have full height glazing. In our meetings, one of the things that was identified by patients was that due to their accident or illness, they may sometimes soil themselves, and they wanted that dignity of being able to purge the room themselves. So a purge ventilation panel, that long panel, it can be opened by the patient themselves, and they have some control over their environment. The furniture and fitments in the room, the wardrobes have drop-down rails, so a wheelchair user can pull them and open them up. And the other really important part for us was that this is where somebody is living, but it's also a clinical area. So we've kept the clinical wash hand basin and nurse zones and nurse call at the entrance to the room, where the ceiling is lower and there's a different color strip on the floor. So then when you come into the open and larger, higher space within your own space, you're kind of defining the zones within the room. Hoists are provided as well. We did a lot of work on the doors. So I mentioned before that we could automate about 22 of the rooms. But for those rooms that we couldn't automate, it was important that the patients themselves could use them, that they weren't too heavy, that they would provide the right amount of visibility for staff. So we actually brought one of the patients over to Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool, and he best represented the patient, the 6 patient personas that we had developed earlier on in the scheme. And on this visit, after this visit, I suppose we tweaked the design in terms of how the buttons and the blinds would open, the weights of the doors. There was a lot of work put into that during the stakeholder design process. Again, just on the bedroom doors here, we had to keep the signage really simple. So you'll see the logo for the flower in this instance and a number. What we did here was we had a magnetic sign. So the full vertical sign is magnetic, and there's an embossed line on it. And above that, the staff can place a magnet, which each magnet has a different image on it. So, for example, the image of the ladybird will tell the staff member that this patient is nonverbal. This avoids this scenario where you might be going into a room and you see these pasted on, records. And it's about dignity, it's about privacy as well. And it's worked really well in the scheme. I've just added 2 more images from nursing home projects as well that kind of have a similar theme. In nursing home, it's not patient, we're dealing with residents, and we wanted to create that sense of my own front door, but invoking memory for those who may be getting slightly more forgetful. So on the right-hand side, we have memory boxes, and this was worked really well. I think we had, for example, there was one older man, and he used to own a sweet shop, and he actually put a jar of sweets in his memory box. On the left-hand side, we have another nursing home where we tried to do a coloured panel at the door to kind of give that sense of my own front door, and the resident's name was on it. In this instance, we used magnets as well, but this was for fire. In the event of fire, that the staff would remember that this resident would need to be evacuated on a mattress. So it was just, instead of something more clinical, that these would be subtle tools that we would use in the building to assist staff as well. So the design development of the en-suites, again, was another one of these stakeholder engagement processes. And I think it was so successful for the staff and for the patients themselves that the Health and Safety Authority have done an ergonomics good practice case study on it. So what did we do? I suppose the first thing we had to do was identify the problem. So what was the problem with the design of these en-suites? We were designing for really complex needs, and none of the, literature would really cover. We were designing for both assisted and independent care. So we were trying to encourage people to be independent. We had to acknowledge that the staff needed help. They could sometimes be carrying patients who had no control over their limbs and obviously was heavy. So ergonomically, this could be a challenge for staff. So what do? We just talked and had so many meetings, as I mentioned before. But we made mock-up rooms of the spaces that we had after these meetings, and they sat there for 6 months. Patients, families, therapists would come in over the 6 months and tweak the design again and again and again. The outcome and interventions that we had, we changed the lengths of hose to what we would have considered right. The bariatric toilet requirements were included in the design. We changed the placing of the toilets and the heights of the bedpans as well. So what was the result? Basically, unintentional barriers were removed. Had we just gone with what we thought, had we gone with the literature, we would have created unintentional barriers. And by doing what we did, we were designing to maximize the fullest potential in self-care, because it had already been tested and checked and commented on by those who actually would be using it. The cost benefit of analysis is just those few bits of old toilets and sinks, it was really invaluable to the outcome of the project. And then all we had to do was look at the LRVs and try and make the space as as unclinical as possible with the materials that we have to use for infection control in healthcare. So I'm just going to touch on changing places toilet. We didn't have a changing places toilet in our brief, but we were aware of changing places toilets, and there was a space that was almost big enough, so we did really want to include it. So the space includes an adult-sized changing table, a ceiling hoist, a shower and a privacy screen, and a peninsular toilet. I really want to touch on it because I'm conscious of the new part-time requirements, and I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, this is a big space, and we really find this." But look, it's really important. It's really important because it allows people who can't normally, go out into their communities to start engaging with their communities, and that's not just positive for the person; it's positive for the families, it's positive for the carers, and I think if our buildings can't keep up with that. I mean, this is now a regulation, but our own buildings need to keep up with that to allow these people out into the community. So I'm just going to touch on the launch of the Universal Design Guidelines for Changing Places Toilets NDA event. It's on the 26th of June at 1:30 p.m. So there's a lot more information on the Changing Places toilet in that. So in the NRH, we had an assisted bathroom as well, a lot of sensory lights on the ceiling. This one here is for the pediatric department, so it has some appropriate illustrations on the walls as well. The furniture and fitments. So the image on the left-hand side are the furniture, is some of the furniture in the pediatric department. So we've set the seating at various heights off the main circulation route. But again, it's just thinking about who is going to be using the space. The therapy kitchens were included on every floor. They include adjustable height sinks, automated sinks, moving up and down cookers. You can pull out the units above, and even the oven itself has a special door, which means that it's an accessible oven. These spaces can really help with learning how to transition home. So just the final thing I'm going to say on the NRH is that it was a really fantastic project to work on. I think, or we feel that, I suppose, the end result takes account of human diversity needs. We feel it enhances user experience because of the scale, the form, the colour, the material and light. But this was all done with that team that I mentioned. All the work that we did facilitates orientation, navigation, wayfinding, and ease of understanding. So ultimately, the end goal all throughout was to ensure that it would be patient-centred, based on the principles of empowerment, dignity, privacy, confidentiality, and choice. Just going to touch on part-time and beyond, because when I was designing at the start of my career, maybe before I started working on healthcare, I thought that by following part-time, I was ticking that box of designing for disability. But really, part-time is the minimum statutory requirements that we need to follow, and it just doesn't go far enough. It focuses on disability, and as I meant, it's just so much more. As I touched on, humans, there is so much more than just a disability, and that human diversity is what we should really be designing for. So BSA 300 is referenced a lot in Part M, and this was revised in 2018. And the big change here is in its description even is that it used to be designing for disabled people, and it now designs for accessible, inclusive environments. It's a really good go-to document showing things like slip resistance, sanitary facilities, signage, visual contrast. All are really easy, small changes to make in a building. So I've included some useful references here. I think what is really positive is that there's more awareness now of diversity in society, but I'm not sure our buildings have caught up really. So most of these that I'm showing you here have been developed in the last 5 years. So, the information is starting to get out there and how we can apply changes to our buildings to adapt as well. So what have I learned? I think ultimately for me, I believe architecture is about people. I think in my time in O'Connell Mahon, I've really come to see how our designs can improve people's lives. I can see how small amendments can make such a big difference. And I think we all know somebody who faces challenges on a daily basis. I think universal design matters. What else have I learned? To quote Eileen Gray from my hometown in Enniscorthy, to create, one must first question everything. And what I would question is it going to work for the broadest range of people? I would also say question everything with everyone, because that was the success of the NRH project. What else have I learned? I think I've learned how absolutely rewarding designing with the end users in mind can be. I think the highlight of my career, one of the highlights anyway, was when I got a call in April 2020, just as the pandemic took hit and just as the patients moved into their new building. A patient was singing Andrea Bocelli from the top of his lungs while other patients were out on the terraces singing and clapping along. Another moment was on hearing that a spinal injury patient could be wheeled downstairs to the cafe to hear the Christmas carols because the corridors were now wide enough to move the beds. Or on hearing that the 4-year-old girl who just had stroke and had been in the hospital had gone home and asked her mommy, when can I go back to the hotel? This for me is what architecture is about. So finally, I'm going to end on this slide. I just love this photo of one of the nuns in one of the nursing homes I worked on. It shows how simple tools can break down barriers. This is the essence of universal design. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an absolutely super presentation, and congratulations for being on time, because we do have time for questions and answers.
Thank you.
I see we have some questions coming in, but I am going to take my privilege and I'm going to ask you one of the questions I wanted to ask first, if that's okay. So we know the NRH is a specialist building type. But you have outlined lessons there, I think, that are applicable to a much wider range of buildings. And I'm just wondering, would you have, for example, a top 3 of universal design approaches or features that you would apply now in all your projects that people here could take away to apply?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, I think the easy one is signage. I think we don't put enough signage. I think we might. I think it's remembering that people can forget. So, if you have signage there, make sure you have enough of it, make sure it's simple, and make sure it's at the right height. Say in a library, maybe it's for children, it would be a bit shorter. But yeah, enough of it and keep it simple. Seating, I don't think, putting in seating, but the backrests and the armrests were something that I probably didn't always think about before. Interestingly, actually, on a project I'm working at the moment with the Rotunda, they've asked us to take out the central armrest because we weren't thinking about larger people. So for every bank of 2, we keep that central armrest out. And I think finally the other one's probably contrast. It's that LRV and the pattern and the gloss. I've often wanted to put these really cool images on walls and forgotten that can actually be quite irritating or difficult for certain people to experience. So they would be my 3, I think.
Very good. Thanks very much for that. And another thing I think is really interesting about the building is, the way you spoke about the importance of access to nature and access to outdoors. And maybe we wouldn't always consider that as kind of an essential part of universal design. Could you expand a bit more on that? You mentioned that that's really important in all healthcare facilities.
Yeah, I think we recognize the therapeutic benefit of it for sure. And I think having that access was really important for rehabilitation, was providing places for patients to access, practice, mobility practice, having proper wide paths and sensory gardens. But it wasn't just, I suppose, the physical benefits, it's the mental health benefits. And I think we all do understand that vision, of the trees or a forest, or it's that mental health benefit that would provide, and that everyone should have access to that. I think if you're going to be in a hospital for a year, you need that, you have to have that outer reach and outer look as well.
Absolutely. And I suppose we all found the benefit, the importance of that, especially during the COVID pandemic. I think we realized that. I have a question here. It's in relation to the process you described. First of all, it says great presentation. Well done. May I ask, how are patients, staff, families, equipment providers, and technology specialists consulted throughout? For example, when the mock WCs were being used, did you elicit feedback via informal conversations with staff and families, or were more formal methods used, such as surveys and workshops?
So a lot of that was taken on by the staff themselves in terms of the interaction with the patients. We did have many meetings with patients, but once the mock-ups were built, they were brought down by therapists or brought in with families. So we were given the output of that, and we would have had our meetings, but because it was like going in and out for over 6 months timeline, it was managed by staff in that way. So the staff would go down with them and test what they would normally do moving a patient. So we were a little bit outside of that because it was more sort of to do with ergonomics and wheelchair transfer, etc. But we would get all the feedback and have the meetings after. So it was a mix basically. Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question.
We seem to have a mix of some very detailed questions and some very general ones. I'll stick to maybe some process ones for the moment, and then we might go into some of the detail. Fab presentation, Hannah. How do you respond to people who say that all this consultation takes too long, the needs are too diverse to implement, and finally too costly?
Oh, look, I suppose the NRH was a very specific type of project, and I said we just didn't have the literature maybe to follow it. And not all our clients are going to want to engage or feel like they have time. But I think they're really, if we look at all those documents I referenced, they're small changes. The client doesn't take any long, okay, it might take a little bit longer to choose the LRV, but they're not big changes. These aren't, a handrail is not a big thing to add to a building. It's, there's small changes. So I think we should be driving it. I don't think it needs to be client driven always. Healthcare is very, very specific. And I think we've talked about this ourselves before, Ruth. I'm working on a maternity hospital now. We don't have the same level of engagement of the end user at the moment. We will try at some point in time, but we still think about the seating being big enough or all those other things that I've mentioned. So I don't think it should cost money, really.
Okay. Another question, which is in relation to the slide you had in relation to the memory boxes at the nursing home residence doors. Can you talk about any other small measures you have used in designing for people with memory loss in their residences?
Yeah, so with infection control, it can be quite difficult. So even sometimes we're not allowed to have photos. So we have tried to have laminated images, or those glazed boards where you can put photos from your family and it has a glass door over it. So yeah, sometimes we are limited in what we would like to do, but things like being able to put up pictures, bring in your dog, for example, like we were saying there. They're small. I think that they're the main tools. It's in the personal area that we do it, because that's someone's bedroom and that's their zone, and then they're moving into the more social areas within the nursing home. So I think it's mainly in the space itself. It's allowing people to take ownership of their own space within the nursing home.
Okay. A question that's a little bit more detailed. The furniture in the NRH appears very well considered and varied. Was this as a result of working closely with staff?
I think it was meeting everyone that we met. I think it was just seeing. When you see the broad range of patients that were there, from 0, because the pediatrics goes from age 0 to 18, it had to be broad. And I think we had to consider that, a comfy slouchy chair was going to be difficult to get out of for somebody who doesn't have that ability. So I think it's just meeting everybody, talking to staff, and just taking a step back to think, of what our children, or just putting yourself in those people's shoes, I suppose, as best you can, which obviously is impossible at times.
Okay. Now, I think we have 2 questions about the flushes on the toilets. Was automatic flushing of WCs considered? And if rejected as a solution, why? And let me scroll up. There was another one. Why do the toilets have the wall buttons for flushing instead of traditional flush handles? So, can you remember discussions around decisions for flushing?
I definitely remember discussions for sure. I can't actually remember why it wasn't automated, but I can provide that answer for sure. But we had a huge amount of discussion on it, and the push plate was the preferred option. I think, and I could stand to be corrected on this. This is often what you find when you go back into the built environment. So sometimes some of the decisions were made about what the patient would find back in the built environment. So what you might be seeing in some of those images is not the automated solutions.
Okay.
But I can answer that. I'll check that. Yeah.
Of course. There's a question: are the staff facilities in a different section of the hospital?
So somebody must know this hospital. So we have staff facilities in our brief. So we have staff facilities with both staff rest areas on each ward and smaller staff changing areas. I understand that since possibly the pandemic, but they are putting in a much larger staff change area that is a little bit detached from the from the hospital itself. But I think there's reasons to do with the amount of showering, etc. It's a change in. So I should say that NRH started in 2013. That's when we started working on it. So the brief that we had was relevant in 2013. It was finished in just in 2020 there. But there's a lot of changes would happen in a hospital in a decade in terms of what might change.
Absolutely, and I think that leads me on to another question that came in. Somebody asked, is there anything now that you would do differently, a decade on, maybe from when you got the brief?
Yes, I think neurodiversity was one that I think it may have happened naturally because of the meetings that we had. There would have been sensory difficulties, etc. I think if I was looking at another building now, neurodiversity is definitely something that I wouldn't have thought about in 2013. That's definitely really relevant now, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Bear with me while I flick down. We have a request. Can you please email or type in the reference documents as the slide moved quickly? Absolutely, we can include those when we issue out the CPD certs. Can you talk more about the 6 types of persona considered in the project?
I meant to have it to hand. Yeah, it's quite complex actually, and because I'm not the medical expert, we engaged with Loughborough University, and the staff had a lot to do with it. But it was all about the combination of physical and cognitive difficulty that the patient might have. So it's actually quite medically quite technical.
Okay.
And so, but it would try and see the level of the different disabilities. So you might have someone who was just had a physical disability and no cognitive disability. You might have someone who had both, a lot of both or a little of both. So it was basically the combinations of that and some more technical, in terms of their limb absence, for example, versus acquired brain injury. So I suppose there's 2 physical versus cognitive differences.
Okay. I have a question. Would you know if the Part M is expected to be revised soon? I don't know if that might be aimed at me. I'm afraid I don't have any information in relation to that. So I suppose most people on the call will know that Part M 2022 included revisions for the provision of changing places toilets, and Hanna kindly gave us a plug for our launch of our Universal Design Guidelines for changing places toilets, which are happening next week. I'm afraid I don't have any information about other revisions to Part M. We're getting close to the end. I think we have 2 minutes left, Hanna. Maybe just as a final question, could you say, what for you makes a successful building?
Thanks, Ruth. I think I used to think it was wow. I think when it used to be the wow factor. I think it should still be wow. It'd be great if it's wow. It should be functional, but I think fundamentally that it should be considerate of people. So that's successful building for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we might leave it at that. There are a couple more detailed questions. If anybody wants to send in emails directly to me, I don't have emails. Some of the questions are anonymous, but I think myself and Hanna would be quite happy to follow up with answers to any of the more detailed questions. You can email ruth.o'reilly@nda.ie if you want to send that on to me, and we can follow up. I'm also conscious I think we've over 100 participants today, which is absolutely great. And I know a number of you will have requested CPD certs, so they'll be coming out to you in the following weeks. And Hanna has kindly agreed that we can share her slides when we're sending that out. So I think we'll leave it there. Hanna, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed that. Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to finish promptly, and I'll just send everybody out now. I hope you have a good lunch and enjoy the sunshine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks.